Okay, we are online, and let's start the screen sharing. There's no mic, there's no camera in here, of course, so all we have is the audio taking place. And a picture of the screen as we see it up here. Okay, we've got quite a lot of stuff in the agenda today. I want to make sure everybody understands where it is. Andrew, have you been able to follow our class from last week?
I have not. All I know is that it was just introduction.
It was primarily introduction, but I really wanted you introduced to the tools so that you're able to follow and follow the class and understand what we're doing. Were you able to log on?
No, I've not.
Okay, let me know if you have difficulty with that. You have received log-on information, have you not?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, but that's part of the assignment here. Let's go ahead and look at the agenda for this week. Okay, up at the top of the agenda, I always have a link to the Google Plus event, which you can follow if you want to participate remotely while it's taking place. And that way we'd actually be able to hear you here, and you can participate in real time. This is where the YouTube video is going to reside. And I'm not sure the extent to which you can watch that while it's taking place. I'm not sure you would need to.
Did you know you can actually stream from YouTube as well?
Access what?
You can stream from YouTube as well.
That may be what is happening here. So I'm not sure. It's all done through Google Plus, and of course Google owns YouTube, the interface. Okay, here's our agenda, and let's launch right in. This, I think, is a very instructive little illustration. I think it's rather important to understand what's going on there. When you folks watched, and I realize that you didn't all get a chance to watch the videos that had been assigned, I will assign those again and add something to them. These are Ken Robinson videos, very short. They're about education in general, and specifically, this one is on changing education paradigms. The second one is really on how we should be changing education. Now, he's thinking, of course, in terms of traditional institutional education and doesn't really take alternative education into account very well, but what he's saying applies so appropriately to what we are doing. I might even watch a bit of that in here against my rules. My rules generally are to avoid wasting class time with things that we could do outside of class. And so, excuse me, we may look a little bit at that. But in watching that, Brian's, the one who did watch it, were there any words at all there that you didn't understand?
There was a few, none that I could really remember, but just a few that caught me off guard.
Okay, that's one of the things you'll want to do, of course, is get into the habit of putting them down and putting them into our vocabulary journals, just so we acquire them as they go along. But there were relatively few, I would think. Yeah, it was generally understandable. He didn't go beyond the fringes of the normal expected vocabulary. However, I'll bet there was an enormous difference there between his active vocabulary and your active vocabularies. Do you understand the difference there? He used words which you're probably unlikely to use.
That we wouldn't commonly use.
I'm sorry?
That we wouldn't commonly use.
You wouldn't commonly use. Indeed, you probably understood them fine, but you simply haven't incorporated them into your active vocabulary. When we're looking at vocabulary, we always have to take into account whom we're talking to and how much they're likely to understand. And we don't want to baffle them or confuse your readers or our listeners. One wants to stay within their passive vocabulary, at least for the most part. Now, that depends, of course, on who your listeners are. If you're writing something for college application essay, there shouldn't be a lot of constraints on your vocabulary. Now, we're going to look at vocabulary in a lot of ways and find, first of all, that we can expand our active vocabulary to encompass a good deal of that passive vocabulary. Rather than use the same term all the time for one particular concept, let's look at what alternatives exist. And of course, where do you go to find alternative words?
The dictionary.
Okay, some thesaurus, yes. Some dictionaries, indeed the one that I use here, has a thesaurus entry at the bottom of every page. And so, yeah, but specifically it's the thesaurus. Okay, now the how to use vocabulary journals. I want to go into that, but one of the things that was specifically on the assignment sheet last week was this one here. You've all seen this. I assume this is the class orientation page, right? Andrew, have you seen this before?
Yes,
Okay, good.
but I don't have the book yet.
Not important.
Oh.
We will work around that. Okay, now just a few important points I wanted to make here. There's a little introduction to the online classroom there, which you might like to go and look at if you have interest. You know what the textbook is here and where you can get it. And then the class rules. I hate the concept of saying rules. I've already said it once today, and it irks me somewhat because for the most part, I find rules to be inconsistent with creativity and education. But I like this one very much. When Thomas Edison was asked by a reporter what the rules of his workshop were, he is said to have responded, "Hell, there ain't no rules here. We're trying to accomplish something," which in itself implies this contradiction. It implies really the oxymoron of applying rules to education. And indeed, it may be regarded as oxymoronic. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so, however, in this one simple utterance, Edison does break the one rule in our classroom. And that one is, of course, that spoken and written English must comply with the rules of formal English in the class, because that's what we're trying to learn. That's what we want to emulate and practice. If indeed, and there may be occasions on which we want to delve into other dialects and accents and maybe even languages to some extent, that's fine too. We'll go wherever the interest takes us. But for the most part, our discussion is going to use that formal realm of English, which is acceptable on an essay and indeed specifically acceptable on a college admissions essay. You've read the rest of this. I'm not going to bother you with it. Would you like to let me know if you have any questions about it? No? Okay. One of the things I asked you to do is please just be patient and don't worry about not understanding everything. We've got a range of different abilities and ages in the class and a range of different experience. And so from time to time, we're going to encounter material that challenges all of us. And sometimes that will be more than just a little bit. And so please be patient. We'll figure out a way through it one way or another, but it really makes much more sense to do it on multiple levels like that than to try to do it in a strictly stratified state of everybody doing exactly the same thing at the same time. You can't be particularly creative making cookies with a cookie cutter. It just doesn't give you the flexibility for that. And we want to break out of that to some extent. Okay, so we've got beginning students will emulate more advanced students. More advanced students will serve as literary role models for younger students while emulating the work of yet more advanced students. And all of us will sharpen our language skills by reading, studying, and listening to the works of some of the greatest writers and orators in the history of the English language, much of which I've tried to populate our classroom with. And I would appreciate your suggestions and contributions as well. If you come across something that you think is particularly apt, the subject matter is not terribly important. You can take it from any direction. But if you come across language that you think would be of value to us, please let me know and we'll look at it and consider it. There are a few things that I tend to try to avoid just because as a teacher, you're always in danger of getting in trouble for putting something up there that's inappropriate. Recently, you may have read in the news how that has happened. Okay, so required equipment, got to be able to get onto the computer. I do ask, please, a dictionary and thesaurus, and I would appreciate it if you have something handy actually while we're in class. It doesn't have to be a physical dictionary, but access to some sort of dictionary that I can ask you, okay, here's a word, would you mind looking that up? And we'll do that. So if one or more of you wouldn't mind having a dictionary of some sort handy, and a willingness to consider difficult and unfamiliar material is more of a challenge than an obstacle. Grading policy. I don't like the idea of grades. I talked about that last time. I think that they're really antithetical to education in a way, to be judged by the same person who's teaching you. But because I've been pushed in to do it, I'm using a system which was introduced to me by one of my favorite teachers. He was actually a physicist, but he was teaching Fortran at the time, in which each project the number of projects, the number of acceptable projects satisfies the requirement depending on the number of projects making up the grade. And of course, there's the grading policy you can go and look at. For this class, we will make a few basic assumptions. It's never wrong to use language well. If you can write well, it's always easy to write down to your readers if necessary. You may have to reduce your vocabulary somewhat in order to make sure that it's easily accessible, but it's much easier to do that than to raise the level of your vocabulary or the level of your rhetoric. And indeed, we're going to be shooting fairly high when we look at college admission essays and so forth. I want to talk a little bit about college too, to ask whether college is really as important as everybody seems to think it is. And I think that's worthy of discussion. And another one here, it is an insult and a disservice to your readers to assume them always to be either uneducated in English, illiterate, or demented. And I hate to say it, but an awful lot of textbooks seem to make that assumption. Let's aim everything at the third grader. As a result, you don't learn English from your textbooks. You learn third grade English from your textbooks. You've all read this, I assume. Does anybody have any thoughts on it? I don't want to go through and read the whole thing. But this assumption that you have to dumb down your English is really not appropriate here. And we're going to seek out and find examples that transcend the language that one normally encounters in classes. Okay, so you've read all of this. The class takes place here, but it's also online. And since this is a language class, as long as we're using the language, the subject matter can cover just about anything. If there's something of interest to you, bring it up and we will explore it. Okay, and just again, please be patient. Any questions at all? Okay, Okay, I wanted to discuss the Ken Robinson talks. I'm still tempted, perhaps, to look at some of them. The second talk that I assigned to you, I have listened to it 3 times now, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's unscripted. He's probably given the talk many times, but it's unscripted and just beautifully felicitous. Brian, do you have any thoughts on it at all? Any responses from it? How many times did you see it?
I just saw it once a few days ago.
Okay, what do you think of his thesis? Here I'm asking you about his language, of course, but what did you think of the points he was trying to make?
I thought it was good. It was powerful and like you could still understand it. And he used his like a different type of English than like what most people use.
Than like most people use. Exactly. I'm sorry, I don't mean to disparage, but that's one of the distinct differences. You'll notice also in Ken Robinson's speech, he never ums and ers at all. Never at all. I do, I know that. But he has managed to transcend that, which is nice. And he does talk a good deal about creativity here. I'm going to ask you folks, please, to look at it again or look at it for the first time. And one of the big questions he asks is about creativity. In the second video, he talks about a study that was done by IBM in which people from companies all over the world, some vast number, were interviewed and a poll taken as to what the most important things they look for in employees would be. And do you remember what they were?
Not 100%.
Okay, he gives them to you in reverse order, which is sort of strange. The first one in reverse order is adaptability, the ability to change and look at things in a different way. And the second one is creativity. And then he goes immediately on to explain that, yes, but adaptability and creativity are both bred out of you in the traditional school system, which really implements compliance and conformity. And because our school system was designed really for for an age past the Industrial Revolution, which no longer applies, we're still using cookie cutters to try to be creative, and it doesn't work particularly well. Then the question is, how do you foster creativity? I recall you were just talking about that a moment ago. How do you foster creativity? And well, one of the problems there is, do you know what an algorithm is?
Yes.
Good. Can you explain to us what an algorithm is?
An algorithm. Isn't it? Well, I'm not a coder, but I think I know what it is. Isn't it a series of numbers or?
It can be like a pattern you use to solve something.
Very good. Very good. Yes. It can possibly be a series of numbers. Yeah. It's a pattern. It's a series of steps that one follows, and those steps may have meta steps in them. That is to say, one step might say, rather than do the next thing, it's go back 3 steps and start there. And that really is the basis for all computer programming. But the thing is, if there were an answer to this question, how do you foster creativity? And you were able to write an algorithm for teaching creativity, would you have accomplished anything? And I think the important thing there to understand is there's absolutely no way with an algorithm to come up with anything creative. If you can write a computer program that will do it, what you've come up with is not creative. You have created a formula, if you'd like, And there's certainly many people who use formulas for what they might be calling artwork in one sense or another. It's certainly been used in music. But the question as to whether it's creative or not, I think, is a major one. And so my conclusion there, tell me if you agree or not, is that if you can define a set of steps for doing something, what you come up with at the end is not something creative. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so how do you teach creativity if you can't define a set of steps for doing it? And I'm not sure that we're approaching it the right way there, because creativity can be taught, or at least it can be inspired and introduced. But I think the way it's really takes place is it's more contagious than anything else. If you look at something creative, or many things that are creative, and you work with creative people and you see the creative process, that can be contagious, and that can catch and go as fast as any other way to formulate these things. This is my conclusion, and I've been used to doing it for some time. I think it works fairly well. Let's see how well we can do that. So what we're going to be doing is looking at creative people, at creative projects, and especially creative use of language, perhaps. Okay, some time ago, I came across a book which I think is absolutely wonderful source of study. Here it is. I don't like to assign books because, I mean, that requires you to go and buy a book. I have asked the class in the past to get this book. Those who are really interested in going on to apply to colleges. And I know Dawson has a copy of it and perhaps some others. However, I have discovered a very similar book online. This one I was not able to find online. So I'd like to be able to have something to project. So I've found a book online, and I have it right here. And you have a link to it. Okay. I'm not sure how this is working online, but anyway, there's this link to it here. And go ahead and take a look at it and follow along. What I found in it, it's actually this one is called 50 Essays That Worked as Applications Essays for Ivy League Colleges. And it starts out with a chapter on commentary on what these applications officers, the admissions officers, are looking for in these essays. And that I thought was very instructive. I read through that. It's interesting to see what they say. They're looking to see what you're really like, not what you want to be seen as. And so they want you to be honest. But there are a number of other things you've got to make sure not to do. And there's a long list of these things that will disqualify you. Make sure, for example, when you're writing the essay, that you actually follow the prompt. If you're asked to write an essay on a specific subject, make sure that you don't write an essay on something else instead. Make sure you cover the questions that you're being asked. And a number of other points in there, which we can go through and look at some point. What I felt was missing in this treatment, however, and I would have loved to see, was a commentary by these admissions officers on the commentary that the other admissions officers were providing. In other words, to get a concept of whether they are all united and in agreement on the criteria that they're looking for. I suspect there's a fair amount of disparity there. But I would like to look a little bit at those, at some of those applications essays, because it is actually delightful reading. These are well-written essays for the most part, and they're often very funny, generally quite inspired, and indeed, once you get into them, you read enough of them, it's hard for you not to start thinking, I can do that. I can do that as well as they can. Do you see what I mean? Let's take a look here. Oh, I wanted to look at browser plugins too. Here we are. Here's one of these essays from the book. This is pulled out of a PDF, so it does strange things to the capitalization. Somewhere I went to the Governor's Honors Program, also known as GHP, a 6-week intensive college-like experience, where the best and brightest students in Georgia gathered to learn and grow as individuals. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, you look at a phrase like, a sentence like that, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That really does sound like irresponsible hyperbole, does it not?
Yes.
Okay, but then he goes on very appropriately, and when I read this the first time, I looked at it and said, oh, that's beautiful. And then sure enough, the commenter below the admissions officer said exactly the same thing. Having uttered this exaggeration, he goes on to say, that is something of a hackneyed phrase. People cheapen the extremes of language by constantly using superlatives for everyday occurrences, making it harder and harder to actually describe the few subtle and transcendent moments of life. Could you have written that? That's a bit of a challenge. It's really beautifully done. You read enough of these things, you'll start finding yourself able to come up with that sort of thing. Now let's approach this another way. You're looking at what sold this essay for this admissions officer. And that is brilliant. Now, of course, you're not going to take that and put it directly into your admissions. The admissions officers have probably read all of these and are familiar with them. But the important thing to remember, and I'm probably going to say this many times, is never use somebody else's words. You've probably heard about what's the word I'm looking for?
Plagiarism?
Plagiarism, thank you. You've been lectured on plagiarism, probably, or perhaps. And what do they generally tell you about plagiarism?
Something never to do.
And how do they define it?
Using other people's words and claiming it as your own.
Very, very good. Exactly. They tend also to include using other people's ideas, using other people's concepts, and so forth. I reduce it down to using other people's words, simply for purely pragmatic reasons. If you use somebody else's words, it's easy enough to find it. Yeah, it's easy enough to identify it and prove it, and you're in trouble. Okay, but use somebody else's idea. First of all, you can't search an idea. There's no such thing as a search engine that will look for an idea. It has to have words to look for. And so it's very hard to determine whether an idea has been borrowed. And also, there's nothing to prevent multiple people from coming up with the same idea. That happens. Unless you're at the top end of your profession and finishing your PhD or doing postdoc work or something like that, when you're expected to know every single word of the literature in your field, um, there's no way uh, to expect you not perhaps to stumble across somebody else's ideas. But the big one is never use their words. Let's look at this. This, I called it exaggeration. I called it hyperbole. Those are similar in meaning. And indeed, the best thing that ever happened to me does certainly seem to be an exaggeration. He goes on to say, is something of a hackneyed phrase. People cheapen extremes of language by constantly using superlatives for everyday occurrences. Nicely stated, but you could improve upon that, couldn't you? Does anybody like to give it a try? Okay, a hackneyed phrase, indeed. It's an often used phrase, perhaps a cliche, which is another word for hackneyed. To cheapen the extremes of language, that's nicely put. But you could use other words to mitigate, to vitiate, to reduce, to lessen. There are a number of other words that would work there very nicely, some of which are a little bit further away from the center of most people's vocabulary, but those would be perfectly acceptable if you're aiming something at an admissions officer. So if you were to vitiate the fringes of language by constantly using superlatives, well, you don't have to necessarily constantly use superlatives, but to everyday occurrences. Can you think of another way to say that? If you refer, for example, to prosaic events in with hyperbole, that would sound to me like a nice alternative to this, saying pretty much the same thing, but putting it a little differently. What does prosaic mean? It means every day. Another word for that might be quotidian. Again, not a word that every high school student knows, but you'll find it in the book, in the thesaurus. Quotidian, prosaic. If you need to talk about every day, the word every day is not one that you want to continue to use. When we're writing in English, the last thing we want to do is repeat words. You have to have a variety. So it's nice to have a selection of other things that you could use there. And hyperbole, I think, works even better than superlatives in this particular environment. Okay, any questions about that? So basically the bottom line of what I'm saying is never use somebody else's words. You can do better. And that's much of what we're going to be working on in this class. Oh, I love this one. This is one of the things that was mentioned again in the commentary afterwards. When you are writing a paper and you're looking for things to say, it can be very useful to take a really wonderful thing that somebody else has said and just use it there, giving credit for it, and just demonstrating not only that you're familiar with it, but that you are capable of recognizing the brilliance in that original idea. And this was indeed what inspired this reader. Language, he's talking about language. And now this is Flaubert, which means, of course, we would not cover it in this class. I tend to avoid things that are in translation. I prefer to use things that are written by masters of the English language rather than rely upon a translator to provide that. But indeed, the translator did a wonderful job with this as far as I can tell. Language, what is language? Language is but a cracked kettle on which we play music for the bears to dance while we dream of making the stars weep. It's hard to believe that wasn't originally in English. But think about it for a moment. Isn't that an absolutely incredible utterance? Language is so limited in its capability. Language just doesn't give us the ability to convey what our minds can aspire to, if that makes any sense. Well, that may be true, but you'd be amazed what masters of language have done, and particularly the masters of the English language. That sounds terribly high-handed, but the fact is the English language is so much more extensive in so many ways than any other languages on earth. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest to you is that you read some things from this work. This is a PDF of it, which is much easier to see, and you'll find that that's linked out there. It's on the internet, and it's the perfect place, I think, to immerse yourself in the kind of creativity that you'd like to be contagious, and see if you can catch what these young applicants have and what they succeeded with it. Okay. So I talked about the class orientation page, the online lookup tools. This takes a little bit of fussing around. This is my page of links to tools and resources. I'm not going to go through the process of installing these. I'm going to assume a certain level of competence, and I'm not necessarily going to require you to do it if you find it difficult, onerous, or distasteful. So let's just look at it. This is a download helper for Firefox. Actually, that's a pretty old one. There's so many out there, and a lot of them are very good. Have you folks worked with those at all?
I have Google Chrome.
Same.
You have? Good. Because when you're working with YouTube, we're going to find that YouTube just has so much in it. I wish there were some other entity out there that were competing reasonably with YouTube and giving us alternatives, but at present there doesn't seem to be anything on the same level. But YouTube doesn't officially let you download anything, but dozens of people have figured out how to do it. And every time YouTube decides it's going to change things and prevent it, within a day or two, they've got an update and figured out a way around it. So please have that just so that you can keep copies of the things that you look at. Whenever you look at something that's absolutely wonderful and you suspect might not last very long, download it so that you don't lose it. Dictionary lookup tool, there are a number of other little plugins. There are hundreds of them, and I'm not an expert on them. I'm sure you have others that you could recommend and suggest, but this one is the one that I have installed here. If I right-click on something here, I can do a search the dictionary for it, search Yahoo for it, search Google Translation Dictionary. You can put as many 6 things in there, which I find is totally inadequate for what I want, but it lets you define your command line in each case so that you can just right-click on anything up here and run off to look it up in whatever you want to look it up in. And that might be Wikipedia, it might be a Greek dictionary or something like that. It could be anything you want to. You can formulate those yourself. Okay, a few other little online resources. YouTube, of course, you'll know about that. Media Player, Classic Home Cinema. This is safe and free. There are plenty of nasty little programs that purport to do the same thing, but actually just put a bunch of toolbars on your browser or something like that. So that one is one that you could rely upon. It's designed for use on older computers and will, as far as I can tell, display just about any video format, regardless of how slow your computer is. There's online file converters, very useful one. That's the one I use to convert the PDF to a doc file. And yeah, there are a few other little things in here. This one we'll visit from time to time. Purdue University has this wonderful English resource that we could look through for reference on grammar. StringNet is a database of collocation devices. If you take a particular word, how many different ways is that word used with other words? The word take, for example. If you were to take in, to take out, to take over, to take up, you see what I mean? You can have one word which can be made into so many different meanings. And StringNet is a very nice resource for that sort of thing. The big classic one, Strunk, the Elements of Style, is out there as well. And so if you really want to look up exactly where that comma is supposed to be when, that's one place to go to look for it. So I'm not suggesting you go out and read any of these. I'm just letting you know that they're here. Okay. Okay. Now, I also wanted to, that's really the purpose of our classroom, is to do the kinds of things that we can't do on our own. I would like to make sure that everyone looks at the material that I've given you. I don't want to make this class a burden, to make this class an unpleasant experience, or the assignments at all unpleasant. If they end up being unpleasant, then somehow I haven't achieved my goal. I've fallen flat somewhere. However, it's not an easy goal to achieve. And therefore, I'm asking for your help in the process. And specifically, I want your help in helping me to understand what areas of interest we can explore in order to make the material fascinating to you. And so I want it to be fascinating. I need your help in trying to make it fascinating. So please do make a point of looking at the material that I've given you. None of it's particularly extensive. There's no more than, I guess, maybe 40 minutes of video watching that I've asked you to do thus far, and I would indeed appreciate it if you would all do that. Now I want to discuss ideas, questions, suggestions that I've asked you to think about for material you would like to cover in here. Now, you can see from the book in front of you, we have plenty of material we can cover in here. But as I said, I want to find things that are actually of interest to you, as long as we use the language the way the book uses it, the way the class is intended to use it. We can cover anything. Suggestions. This was homework, if you recall. Please think about it. Bring ideas. Okay. Last week I asked everyone what your favorite book was, and I think we certainly learned something interesting about that. We've got a couple of modern books and a couple of classics. My question is, as far as language is concerned, do any of those really excel? Do any of those really rise above the others?
It would be interesting to compare the old literature with the new and just see the differences.
That's a very interesting point. That certainly lends itself to a lot of discussion and analysis. Let's see. My problem is I've read relatively little modern fiction, and that which I have read, I don't think really rises to the level of what I'd like to use as exemplary material. But there are some exceptions to that. There's some. Can I ask you folks to make a specific suggestion, and I will make a suggestion in the classical realm. One that's coming up fairly soon, if anybody is familiar with it, is Pan. Anybody tell me what it's about? It's a prequel to Peter Pan. I don't know anything about the movie yet. It's not out yet. It comes out beginning of next month. But it brought it to mind because Peter Pan itself, I don't mean the Disney movie. I don't mean any of the movies or the musical, but the book itself is beautifully written. Of course, it was vitiated and Baudelairized and reduced down to basically third grade reading level in order to present it in other forms. But that's one we've never done in this class. Anybody would be interested in looking at the original book? Sure.
Wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Is anybody interested in Charles Dickens?
What is your recommendation and suggestion with Charles Dickens?
Moby Dick.
Well, Moby Dick isn't written by Charles Dickens.
Who's that written by?
Oh, who is it? I'm trying to remember.
Charles.
Names flit out of my mind. Moby Dick is a vast tome, and I don't know the extent we really want to delve into that. We certainly can if you like. And indeed, if it appeals to you, I would never say no.
I'm throwing out ideas.
Yeah, no, well, it is a solid idea. It's not an idea that would distinguish us in any way from what is taught in traditional classes. In fact, Moby Dick tends to be one of the standard on the standard reading lists, as well as quite a bit of Dickens. And Dickens had some wonderful things, and I've read some wonderful things by Dickens, but somehow that shadow of the public school mandate still hangs over it for me. And I have difficulty thinking about it in terms of something that I would do as a matter of choice. I have no objection to doing it, however, if there's something there that would, Herman Melville is the word I was trying to remember, is the author of Moby Dick. I don't mind doing it if somebody's particularly interested in a specific work of Dickens. Do you have any thoughts? Do you want to jump into David Copperfield, Oliver Twist's Great Expectations?
Yes, David Copperfield.
David Copperfield. I do remember reading that in school. Okay, sure. Let's go ahead and do that. David Copperfield, of course, everything we're talking about here in the realm of classical literature is in public domain. That means that I can put the work right there in the classroom, and you can read it. You don't have to go out and buy something. It's always in much more useful and machine readable form than it is on paper. For one thing, once you've got your system set up, you can right click on something and go off and look it up instantly. And if you come across something and it's in a language that you don't understand, you can highlight it and go off to Google, which will, has anybody worked with that Google Translate tool? It will actually identify what language it is and translate it into whatever language you like. It's not perfect, but it does give you corresponding words on both sides of the translation, which is a very useful thing to have. So anyway, in that form, it's very well. But more importantly, perhaps, all of those works are available in audiobook form. Now, you folks may not have worked with audiobooks a great deal. I think that's one of the best ways to get a feel for a book, especially if you can find a good reader. And so I will see if I can find a well-read version of that work, David Copperfield.
I think I have a copy on my phone that there's a good reader.
Very good. Is it commercial or is it free?
This is on, well, commercial, I think.
Okay. I just try to avoid having to ask anybody to pay anything for anything,
Yeah.
especially if I can find a free version. I will find a free version. I have no doubt that everything
Somewhere out there.
Oh, I'm sorry?
It's somewhere out there.
Well, it's, I know exactly where I'm going to look, and that's a place that I'd like to share with all of you. I found it to be immensely helpful. And it's a site called LibriVox.org, LibriVox.org. And I'm sure you've all heard of the Gutenberg Project. The Gutenberg Project is simply an attempt to put all of the public domain material of history out so that it's commonly available and freely downloadable. It's a wonderful project, a wonderful idea. So look at the Gutenberg Project, but the LibriVox is the audiobook equivalent to the Gutenberg Project. And with the help of volunteers, they are creating audiobooks of all of the books in the Gutenberg Project. So this will be the case for Baronet, what is his name? I'm having so much trouble thinking of names. Who's the author of Peter Pan? J.M. Barrie, Baronet Barrie. And also, of course, Charles Dickens. Everything is in public domain and everything will be available on audiobooks. Now, when it comes to audiobooks, there's so many wonderful ways to use audiobooks. There's so many times when you can't be sitting there looking at a book and reading it, but you can be just absorbing it. When you're doing dishes, when you're driving, when you're mowing the lawn, you can just put your earbuds in and listen to audiobooks. And it's also one of the best ways to acquire an intuitive feeling for the language if you've got a good reader. And so I'll try to find good readers for those.
Now,
Yeah.
For reading, are you targeting specifically classics?
I target classics simply because I'm more familiar with them, and everyone is familiar with classics. Not everyone is familiar with the current literature. I've dabbled in it a little bit and have been left largely unsatisfied as far as the language and vocabulary is concerned.
Is there a way to create a forum or like?
Absolutely.
Yeah, create a forum, say if because I can come up with recommendations for classical books.
Thank you so much for asking that. I didn't realize the extent to which I'd left that uncovered. Here's our main classroom page. Within this classroom page, there is the Writers Forum. This is a forum where we can go and it's the forum I would expect you to hand in your projects in. If you decide to write about some project, we see that Dawson here has handed in a number of wonderful things. I recommend them. He writes very nicely, and you might really appreciate those. You go through and see what some of the other students handed in. But that's the Writers Forum. Now, we also have a number of other forums. I believe we have an open forum, if I can find it. All right, we don't. I'll create one. This, by the way, the classroom you're looking at here is only 1 year old. There's a much larger classroom elsewhere, but it started to get so big it was getting slow. And so I created this one. I'll give you access to that at some point if you need that. Dawson, you've already got access to it. But not everything has been created in this classroom that we've been using. So I will create a general discussion forum in here. You can post things for now in the Writers Forum if you'd like, but I'll create a general discussion forum.
Now, how would you classify a project?
Okay, very good question. A project is whatever is worthy of being a project. This can be a poem, it can be an essay, it can be book chapters. I had 3 books being written in class last year, and their authors were handing in massive chapters on a daily basis. And so that's a wonderful way to go too. Also, if we decide to have a debate or simply a lecture, that's worthy of credit. On a few occasions, I've looked at vocabulary journals and seen the extensive work that some students have put into those and realized, well, that's worth credit too. So whatever looks like it's worth credit is fine. Put your energy into whatever you feel like putting your energy into. And I'm sorry, a lot of this has been very theoretical, and perhaps we should look at more concrete examples of what other people have been doing, just so that you can so it can inspire you to decide to do something either similar or contrasting or indeed an improvement. Okay, I'm sorry that as I said, I didn't really go down this. We are using such tiny little parts of this online class program, Moodle. All I'm using really is the forums and the page building capabilities. Each one of these is a page, or most of these are pages. Some of them are simply links to things that are elsewhere. In the agenda here, last time, I put in these links directly to YouTube. I don't usually do that, but I wanted to make sure that anyone who hadn't been able to log into the classroom would simply be able to click on that in your email and go straight out to it. Normally, however, I would put these into the classroom. That way, as I actually did it with this one here, I think. Tell you what, yes, I think I did that. No, I didn't. That's taken us to YouTube. I'm going to hit this and do a reload. That's going to reload this page, because I did revise this so that it was pointing inside the classroom instead of outside onto YouTube. And the advantage of doing this is that I can do things like this, put in commentary on it, or links to the transcript, or perhaps even corrections of grammar mistakes. He makes a couple of stylistic mistakes in there. They're stylistic mistakes that I suspect I would end up arguing with someone who believes that they're perfectly acceptable. But logically, they're one of the big mistakes he makes in this one is the reason for this is because the following. Now, do you remember the mistake involved there? The reason for this is because.
It is wrong.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's superfluous. It's repetitive. We're saying the reason for this is because. Well, the reason for this is that I have a pencil. This is because I have a pencil. The reason for this is because I have a pencil. It's one is piling it on. It's unnecessary to say it multiple times that this results from this. And reason says it once and because says it again. Does that make sense? Okay. So, I mean, he does that. A lot of people do that. And many more say the reason why. Again, it's the same thing. It's a pleonasm. Has anybody heard of the word pleonasm? Pleonasm is a structural redundancy, something that says something that's already been said. And okay, so these are the four purposes of education, as he's talking about in there. I had to listen to it multiple times to actually find them here. And under economic, we have adaptability and creativity as being the major points, as we discussed before, and we'll discuss again. Okay, how did I get there? Oh yes, I was asked about discussion in the classroom. Now the classroom has a number of other possibilities as well. If you'd like, I can put a chat room in here. I don't think I have one there, but I can put a chat room in here, and I'll put in a general discussion forum as well. Now, when you put something into the general discussion forum, it will appear over here on the right-hand side of the page. Anything that's been added to the class or recent activity will be over here. But I would also recommend, and in fact, I'll probably just go in and do it myself, having all of you subscribe to it so that if somebody posts something in there, it will go out to you by email. Okay? Any other questions about the page itself? Okay, and the language version, again, my problem is here, we can't discuss this very well unless I can get you folks to watch it. What sort of time do we have? Should we watch a little bit of this? As I said, I don't usually like to spend class time doing that. If I can manage to figure out a way to get you folks to talk to me and express yourselves, that would indeed be a superior way to use the time. But I'm not sure how successful I'm going to be with that and what ploy I can possibly use to make it take place. Any suggestions on that?
I'd like to watch the video.
Okay, let's see how this video works. This one, you're the only one to watch any of them, right? This one is wonderful. It's short, and this comes from it. It's all, you don't see him speaking. You see an illustrator describing what he's talking about all the way along, and it's beautifully done by the RSA people, the Royal Society for the Advancement of the Arts. This one I thought was particularly brilliant, but it's a little longer. Let's go ahead and give it a try then. Here he goes. Now, this may tax the capability of my machine.
In indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or necrophilous.
We don't want to focus politics on the notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens were organizing their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
What people talk a lot about in education is the need to get back to basics. And they've been talking about this since the beginning of education, by the way. Normally what people mean when they talk about the basics is a group of subjects that they think are more important than all the others. And particularly in education now, people talk about the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. So they think it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. These are very important fundamental disciplines. They are necessary, but they're not sufficient for the type of education that we need. In any case, the basics of education are not any group of subjects or disciplines. The basics of education are the purposes for which we do this. Why are we invested anyway in systems of mass public education? What's it for? And if we don't agree on the purposes, then we have a problem in talking about the means and the processes. Well, I think there are four purposes to public education, and I won't labour them, but I'll just point them out as a reference point. And not in any particular order. The first of them is economic. We all know that education has powerful economic purposes. It does, and it should. We should recognise it as a fact. We invest so much in it as communities because we expect education will contribute to our long-term economic health, vitality, and sustainability. That's how we got to have these systems in the first place. But the economic model of the day was industrialism, which is why the system looks the way it does. It is not that system anymore for us. We have a different set of imperatives now for our children and for ourselves if we're to make them economically independent, as I think we all want to do, don't we? Don't we want to make our children economically independent? We do. I can't tell you how much we want to make our children economically independent, and at once, if it's possible. But what sort of education do you need for that? There was a report published about 18 months ago by IBM in which they reviewed interviews they had with 1,800 leaders of companies in 80 countries, companies and organizations, and they asked them what their priorities are, what keeps them awake at night. And there were two really that came out in reverse order. They are here. The first, they said, in reverse order, was adaptability. How do you run organizations which are able to respond quickly to change? Now, this is a bottom line issue for companies, because if you don't adapt quickly to changing circumstances, you're very likely to go under. And the history of corporate life around the world is populated with the corpses of once great corporations that didn't move quickly enough. Think, for example, about Kodak. Kodak is now in bankruptcy proceedings. Kodak was synonymous in the 20th century with photography. They invented home photography. They invented digital photography. And now they're out of business. And it's not because people have stopped taking photographs. On the contrary, people are taking more photographs than ever, aren't they? Irritatingly more photographs than ever. I get it all the time. People are posting on Facebook, here's my cappuccino. Check this out from a different angle this time. You know. And here it is, after I've drunk half of it. Fascinating. Send me more of these photographs. What happened was that Instagram came along and whipped the ground ready from beneath the feet of companies like Kodak. They just did not adapt. And the reason they didn't adapt is because organizations are not like machines, they're like organisms. They are living entities made up of people with feelings, motivations, roles, aspirations, passions, and ambitions. And if the organism doesn't respond, just as in the natural world, if it doesn't respond to changes in its environment, it dies. And it's what's happened to many companies, including most recently Kodak. So adaptability. But the top priority these CEOs wanted to for their company's long-term flourishing was creativity. They said, we need companies that are consistently and systematically creative. And how do you do that? You know, we need people who can think differently, but we can't, this is the great irony, we can't always find them because kids coming out of universities and colleges these days find it very difficult to come up with fresh ideas. And why? They've been educated on the standard routine of routine testing, you know, multiple choice tests. We've been sort of systematically quashing the appetite for originality in our education systems. The irony is that a lot of these systems are in place now in what people believe to be the interest of the economy, and corporations say they want something else. So if we're to meet the economic requirement of education, we need to have systems which promote creativity and adaptability as bottom line competencies, the very things that our education systems at the moment are being discouraged from doing. The second purpose of education is cultural. We live in a world that's increasingly complicated, increasingly driven, increasingly contested. Many of the great conflicts around the world now are not economic in character, although there's an economic dimension, they're cultural in character. I mean, look what's happening in the Middle East just now. Look what's been happening in Central Europe. Look what's happening across America. These are conflicts in people's ways of seeing the world, their ideologies, their value systems hitting each other head on. And they may imperil us in the end. And it's a small enough planet as it is, but it's becoming more and more populated. But in any case, for ethical reasons as well as strategic ones, we need forms of education which enable people to understand how they came to think as they do, why their values are as they are, why their patterns of life are as they are, and why other people's are different. We need forms of education which help people to understand their own cultural identity and what formed it, and those of other people. Now, for that, you need a broad education. You need an education that gives equal weight to the arts, the humanities, to social studies, not just to technical subjects. By the way, I came across this quote which I thought you'd like, about what it is to be British these days. I found this on the internet, where I find so many things. But I'm not showing you the other things, I'm just showing you this. What was the law being as it is? So, I thought it'd be like this. It said that being British these days, but you could read American for this or any other nationality you like, but as you'll see. Being British these days means driving home in a German car, stopping to collect some Irish Guinness or Danish lager, picking up an Indian curry or Greek kebab, and spending the evening sitting on Swedish furniture, watching American programs on a Japanese TV. And the most British thing of all, suspicion of anything foreign. That's probably right. So there's a big cultural agenda for education. The third is social. We need forms of education which engage this generation in the processes by which our communities are organised and governed. And there's a lot of evidence that people are pulling away from those roles. There's a lot of evidence of disengagement, disenfranchisement from our political institutions for reasons we can readily see. But John Dewey said this once, he said that every generation has to rediscover democracy. I think that's right. We live in Los Angeles. There was an election for the new mayor a couple of months ago. The election's gone on for 18 months. Millions of dollars have been spent on the election. 15% of the electorate showed up to vote for it. This was on a day when for reasons just of interest to me, I was...
I'll skip some of this here, but just wanted to discuss what he talked about before there. The importance of creativity and adaptability, at least for the economic goals of education. And yet we are training those out. We are quashing them is the verb that he chose. Look that verb up, another wonderful word. We're quashing the creativity and adaptability when we are fitting people into the molds that we're imposing on them in traditional education that is aimed at the industrial age. Because it's not the industrial age anymore. The industrial age was an age in which workers were needed in order to perform repetitive tasks. We don't do that anymore. Repetitive tasks are much better done by a machine. We need humans who are going to think things that machines are, up to now at least, incapable of doing. Now, though discussion of artificial intelligence in the future may be something we'll want to look into at some point. It does promise to be both fascinating and dangerous. Okay, so his point there, I think, was very well taken, that we simply are, with our traditional school methods, aiming students at a workaday environment that doesn't exist anymore. And we need to do something different. Now, how do we do it? I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit here. This part he he's about to launch into, I didn't think it was a great deal of value there.
Where most of the major teaching unions have passed votes of no confidence in the government's education strategy. Well, that shouldn't promote a smug expression of satisfaction on the government. That should keep them awake all night thinking, well, how badly have we got this wrong?
Here he's talking about a vote of no confidence by teachers about the institution itself of education, which is similar in the UK to what it is here. After all, he lives in California, he lives in Los Angeles, but you can tell he's from England. Can you tell where? That's a weird question.
I'm guessing probably like the middle of it.
That's a good way to describe it, what they call the home counties.
I'm going
It's-
to guess United Kingdom.
I'm sorry?
United Kingdom.
The UK, the United Kingdom, yes. I guess that's where he's from. But it's interesting to note that there's so many different dialects there. And his I've never heard anywhere else because it's such an odd admixture of things. He's from Lancashire, which is not his accent. As he actually said in there, I was rather surprised. He comes from Liverpool. And of course, you know what the Liverpool accent is like, the Beatles. That's nothing like how he speaks. Nor would it be for anyone who came from Liverpool or Manchester or Glasgow or anywhere who went through higher education. At least until recently, going through higher education was expected to make you learn how to pronounce things the standard middle way, if you like. And so he has indeed pretty much the standard RP accent, but there are some mistakes in there too that I suspect are a result of deliberate decisions on his part as a result of living in Los Angeles. Many of the vowels in his speech are not what one would expect someone to use. He uses the word he uses the word pass, whereas the English RP would be pass. On the other hand, he never does it to can't, which he still pronounces can't. So he's sort of adopted some of them, but not all of them, which is interesting. But his choice of language, his diction, his choice of words is really delightful. And he manages to put together a long string of words, all of which you know, but probably wouldn't be able to string together that way in describing something. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit and see where we're going there. This part he's talking about here is the dismal state of education because it's coming down from above, and major movements don't work when they come down from above. And he talks about movements, one of which is rock and roll. He said it's not a question of somebody deciding at some high level that, okay, let's take these three chords and create a decades-long phenomenon out of them. No, it's developed spontaneously, and he gives a couple of other examples. You can't impose this kind of thing from above. I'm going to jump ahead here and hope I find something a little.
So if we've got to improve education, we have to improve that bit. And everything else has to take a place around it and not get in the middle of it or get in the way of it. So the focus on teaching and learning to me is vital. Now what we know about learners about children is that children are learning organisms.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Children don't need to be helped to learn for the most part. They are born with a vast, voracious appetite for learning. In fact, they evolve in the womb with a great voracious appetite for learning. There's a lot of evidence now that beyond a certain point, children are absorbing all kinds of things from their mother while they're in utero. They're picking up voice rhythms. They're actually developing tastes for certain types of nutrient It's why kids come out listening to the cadences of language. Now, what we also know is you don't teach your child to speak. Most kids get to learn to speak, in the first year and a half or so of their life. But you don't teach them, do you? If you've got kids, you know that. You don't sit them down, when they get to the age of 1 and say, okay, here's the situation. You probably notice your mother and I keep making all these noises. And they actually refer to things that are in the room here. All these things have names, as we call them. And here's a list of them. Now, there are roughly 50,000 to get through in the next couple of months. And when we've got all those down, we'll start to introduce verbs which can tell you what you do with these things. And later on, things you might have done with them in certain circumstances and things you could have done possibly in the past, or at least the hypothetical past. Of course, you can't do that. They just pick it up. I mean, you nudge them, you correct them, you encourage them, teach them to speak. We do teach them to write. That's a different thing. Writing appeared much later in human evolution than speech. I mean, very recently, actually, we have a history of written systems. But my point is that children have a vast appetite for learning. And it only starts to dissipate when we educate them. That's to say, when we put them in buildings designed for the purpose and put them in serried ranks and start to force feed them information in which they may or may not have an interest. Now, the conceit of education is that children learn anyway. The conceit of education is that we can help them do it better and direct them to things they may not otherwise learn if left to their own devices. That's why we plan to do this sort of stuff. But learning will happen anyway, and with the new technology, it's happening more and more, actually, spontaneously. What it means is if we really want education to be effective, we have to focus on the process of teaching and learning. And teaching, I think, over the course of the past number of years, while these so-called reform movements, has become reduced in the political discourse to a kind of delivery system. Your job is to deliver the national curriculum. I don't know when we borrowed all this lexicon from FedEx. I don't know when that began to happen, that we dropped the curriculum off for you. But teaching has become seen as a kind of delivery system, and teachers have become seen as kind of functionaries in the raising of standards and the administration of tests. Actually, teaching is an art form. Everything I've ever learned and seen about teaching convinces me that is the case. It's not enough to be a good teacher to know your stuff, though you need to know it. You don't need to know everything, but you need to know enough to be able to teach it. But more than that, you need to be able to excite people about the material. You need to engage them. You need to pique their imaginations. You need to fuel their creativity. You need to drive their passion for it. You need to get them to want to learn this. You need to find points of entry. That's the gift of a great teacher. Somebody was saying to me earlier today, how can you do that with 35 kids in the class? I know teachers, and my wife Terry was among them when I first met her, with 42 kids in the class, and the place was humming and alive with activity and learning. And you do that not by you having to teach them everything, but by getting them actively involved in teaching themselves and teaching each other. In Harvard now, they talk a lot about the flipped classroom. The physics professors there who have stopped lecturing people, which is ironic for me to be reporting on now, I know that, but instead he gets the students in groups to work together and teach each other. And I find it very interesting that finally, Harvard and our universities have discovered what every good primary school teacher has known for years, that people teach themselves if you create the right conditions for it. So one of the ways that we improve education is by recognizing that it happens at the point of where teachers and learners meet. If it doesn't happen there, it doesn't happen at all in formal organized education systems. So you can't improve education by ignoring that relationship or demeaning it or vilifying it. But it also means if you are in that relationship, you hold the tools of power right in your hands. You can change the system yourself. You don't need to wait for anybody to do it. Now, the shift, I think, is this. I said that we have mechanistic metaphors of education. We do, for the most part. We have systems of education, too. But it's not a mechanistic system. And this, I think, is one of our points of entry into the future. That a school, just like a child or a teacher, is not a component. They are living organisms, living, breathing entities. A school is a community of reciprocating individuals who develop their own culture, their own way of seeing things, their own habits and rituals and so on. We can begin to see that there isn't a single point of influence. The teachers in the system, the head teachers, are just as influential
Okay, I'm going to stop there when we start talking about the structure of schools. That get a little off topic here, but I think he made some really fine points there that I've been working on for years. Is kids are really in a native form are just like sponges. They'll absorb everything that comes down. I watched my daughter playing with water. Just had a little water wheel, and there's something that you could pour with, and then sop it up, and then bring it out. That sort of thing goes on for hours, and they explored every little part of that, and they would feel deprived if they weren't able to learn. And as he put very effectively in that, and I've been saying for years, school deadens those impulses so often. And it's very difficult to reinvigorate them, which is what we're trying to do. And so let's see what we can do, but I'm going to need your help to do it. Okay, we've decided a little bit about where we're going next. I would like to ask you all, please, to listen to this video and the one that preceded it. And first of all, just listen to it for the sounds. Don't even bother to take notes. Just listen to the sounds of it, and then you might want to go through a second time and put down the words that were unfamiliar to it. To rive, that it's riven. That's not a usual word, but it's a very nice word. It's one that might win you points on a good essay. So then put those down. Now, in most cases, when I give you a video, I'm going to tell you, and in most cases, I'd like you just to assume that the content of what he's talking about is not what we're talking about. It's how he says it, or she says it. Because we'll get on to subjects which maybe you'll disagree with intensely, or perhaps agree with, and I don't want to get in trouble, or I don't want to get into contentious realms in which we may argue about what is and what isn't true. Let's just look at most of it for the language. This, however, I think the content is very well stated and well conceived. We have decided, did we want to look at David Copperfield? Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to put it in the class in both audiobook form and text form. And let's do a couple of chapters at the beginning, at least up through the visit to the Pegates and the Barcus is willing chapter, and we'll be introduced, of course, at the beginning to the irksome Mr. Murdstone. Okay, how many of you have read it? Okay. Really want to read it again?
I don't mind.
Okay. Now the question is this something we'd all like to do? If we all do it, at least we'll be able to discuss it. But we don't all have to read the same things. If there's something else you'd like to read, if someone wants to jump into Herman Melville, you're welcome to do so. I don't think I want to inflict that on the little class. Okay, so we can go in that direction. Let's take us back to our classroom here. This is what I intend the class to do. We're going to start out with an agenda, and always please update your vocabulary journals. I'll be going in and commenting on your entries there. We will look at those entries. We will discuss reading material or watching material, listening material generally. And I'd like to get into other discussions. How to foster creativity was the one I'd chosen for this week, rather arbitrarily, but I think aptly. And I'm not sure I got a lot of feedback on it, but it's an important one to discuss. And this one, I think, is probably extremely important for many of you who are thinking about college and college application. This is a find. I just found it this last week, this compendium of winning essays, and they're wonderful to read, and the commentary on them is very, very useful to study as well. So there, I'd like you to just look at it, find something on some subject that's of interest to you, and read it, and be prepared to come into class and tell the rest of the class about it. Is that all right? There are 50 of these essays to choose from, so you can choose something in some area that you enjoy. I took a couple of those and put them in here to discuss in class, which we didn't really get to today, but we can if you'd like. I'd like to look at more of these, and really one of our goals is for you to look at these and realize suddenly, yeah, this isn't beyond me. And really it isn't, I'm sure. And I can do that. Not only that, it would be nice, and this takes practice, unfortunately, it would be nice to get to a point, and you'll realize when that point comes, when somebody says, can you give me 800 words on this by 7 o'clock? And you say, no problem. You see what I mean? It's perfectly possible to have that kind of confidence in your ability to take words and put them down in quantity. Indeed, if your speech achieves a level at which transcription will produce finished edited copy, you can produce copy very rapidly. You just have to get your fingers to start catching up with your speech. You see what I mean? And so it takes practice, though. You have to keep writing in order to achieve that. But it's a wonderful thing to have behind you when you go into any new classroom, into any new educational environment, to realize that, okay, he wants an essay for tomorrow, no problem, I'll have it done before dinner. Any questions? Yeah.
For the projects, is there a guideline or just anything?
I can give you guidelines if you really like them, but I prefer to ignore them. Because if you can come up with something that that breaches the confines of what I would come up with, that's ideal.
What I mean is, are we limited to what topics we can write about, or like, does it
You're
have to
not
be
limited
specific?
at all to the topics you can write about, but I'm going to ask you, please, not to write about anything that will get the class in trouble.
Okay, so
Okay.
it can be about technology or
Absolutely. Write about the STEM if you like, that he's talking about the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And his contention is that that's really a little corner of what we should be studying. More important than that is, why are we studying it? And how we, in our part of the world, differ in our outlook on things than people in other places. So I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question particularly well. I do feel that you would like to discuss possible topics to write on more extensively. And does anybody have any other suggestions for perhaps something we could all write on for next week?
I'll think about it.
Okay. Okay, I will put up a general discussion forum so that we can throw that sort of thing around. And even chat room, if you go into the chat room and somebody else is there, it'll actually say it on the right-hand side of the page, so you can join other people in the chat room if you feel like, inside our classroom.
also I might write up something this week. I'm not sure. I have a general idea.
Yeah. Now, are any of you taking other classes?
Yes.
If
not
you,
here.
I'm sorry?
Not here.
Not here. But I'm not thinking here necessarily, anywhere.
Oh.
If you have something you need to write for another class, well, that's no problem. Hand it in here too. And if you hand it in here soon enough, then you can hand it in the edited version wherever else you're working. Okay. Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Okay. Usually I'll send out notes and assignments, usually on Friday or something like that. And I'll try to include everything that we decided to do here, though I'm not sure I'll remember. Okay, let's bring our class to a conclusion here. This is the end of College Prep English class at Excellence in Education for homeschoolers.